First came the smell, acrid, heavy, with a sweet hint of rot. It wafted through the corridors of the west wing, seeping through the cracks in the doors, and settling on the curtains. The servants averted their eyes and, pressing vinegar-soaked rags to their faces, retreated deeper into the palace. On the second day, the head maid, Anselma, silently left the keys on a silver tray and left without looking back. Guards blocked the wing on the orders of the valet himself. Thus began the last week of Duke Leopold of Thuringia, one of the most powerful nobles in the empire. He was still breathing, but no one entered the bedroom anymore. The chronicler who left brief notes about those days wrote, "The rooms resembled a butcher's shop. The sheets were gray from the fluid that had flowed from his belly. The floor creaked with a sticky film, and the Duke himself, according to those who saw him, only moved his lips and moaned like a creature deprived of speech." It all began 22 days earlier, with a sudden seizure during confession. The Duke, known for his iron fist and almost paranoid obsession with cleanliness, lost his balance right in front of the clergyman and hit the back of his head on the steps. At first, they thought it was the stone, the heat, or his age. But by evening, Leopold was complaining of pain in his groin and throat. He was immediately placed in seclusion, with only the apothecary, the surgeon, and a monk, summoned from the west, allowed to enter his chambers. By morning, his body was swollen. Medical records found later in Dr. von Goblin's trunk contained the following description. The groin area is softened. The abdomen is filled with a green, foul-smelling gas. When touched, the skin cracks and oozes cloudy pus. The pupils are dilated. The tongue is coated with a dark film, and there is no urination. At that time, there was still hope. They ordered bowls of opium to be placed around him, performed 3 bloodlettings, and rubbed him with Persian ointments containing myrrh. But things only got worse. After 2 days, his left leg began to darken. The smell became unbearable. The Duke lost consciousness, and when he came to, he whispered the names of the dead, his own father, his brother, a hanged heretic, a burned witch. He scratched the walls, begged to be taken out into the light, and shouted that angels are walking on the ceiling with rusty spears. His sons did not come. The eldest was at court in Augsburg, the younger in Burgundy. His mother had died 2 years earlier. All that remained was a shadow of court etiquette, a few courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, 4 bodyguards, and a cook who was forbidden to leave the kitchen. The servants no longer crossed the threshold of his chambers. His body continued to decay while he was still alive. By the 10th day, maggots were crawling out of the Duke's stomach. Pus seeped through the bandages, despite being changed every 3 hours. The valet fainted at the sight of one of the sores spontaneously opening, releasing worms onto the stomach, where the skin had already separated from the muscles. 3 beds had to be replaced. The bed was no longer covered with sheets. Straw was spread on it instead. The pillows were thrown into the courtyard. The priest, admitted by order of the archbishop, later wrote, he did not listen to prayers, did not repent, only asked to be strangled. He said he saw demons in the cracks in the ceiling. He spat blood and called for his mother. The Duke's wife, Margaret, did not enter his room once. She locked herself in the chapel, sending her ladies-in-waiting there as well. It was said that she prayed secretly for death to come quickly. Some considered this a sin. Others considered it prudence. The political situation at that moment was extremely fragile. The Duke kept his will with him, and no one knew to whom he would leave his title. There were rumors that he was going to disinherit his eldest son because of his connection with the reformer. His secretary was found hanged 2 days before his illness, and the notary who was supposed to certify the document was never allowed into his chambers. From secret reports sent to Vienna, the situation is critical. The Duke is delirious. His body stinks throughout the entire floor. No one knows who will receive the seal. The eldest son is outside the fortress, and the younger son refuses to come. Lady Margarita is not interfering. Dead rats found at the entrance confirm the worst suspicions. When the gatekeeper died, they said it was a sign. They said that the Duke's chambers were sealed by God. On the 15th day of suffering, one of the chancellors arrived at the castle, but he was not allowed in. The Duke, barely breathing, no longer spoke. He only moaned, writhing in his pillows, his back covered in blood. His last words, according to rumors, were, "Burn everything, everything dirty, including me." On the 16th day, the guards were changed twice, those who stood at the entrance to the Duke's chambers. During the first hours after the stench began to cough up blood, one of the soldiers developed a boil under his eye. Another's neck swelled up. They were taken away without a word. The castle was silent. There was no longer the sound of boots in the corridors, only the faint creaking of floorboards when someone approached the kitchen quickly, with short steps, and disappeared just as quickly. The chronicles indicate that from that moment on, the authorities effectively lost face. The dying Duke did not speak, did not sign decrees, did not meet with ambassadors. His room, boarded up from the inside, became a festering boil that the court preferred to ignore. The valet, formerly responsible for the schedule, now slept in a closet and carved the days away with a knife on the doorframe. The courtiers no longer asked, "How is the Duke?" They asked, "Who else is coming today?" The night of the 17th to the 18th was recorded as the night of stench. The chronicler who remained at court testified, "A foul odor penetrated the dressing rooms. The curtains were black with moisture. Spiders crawled out of the corners, and the candles smoked as if something foul was in the air. The Duke's body was no longer distinguishable under the bandages, just a lump oozing pus and swarming with wet white worms. The body had swollen so much that the sheets had to be cut off. They were not washed, but burned immediately in a coal pit. The mattresses were changed 3 times during the night. The servants refused to enter the bedroom, even with bandages. One of them, named Lothar, was found in the garden with a knife in his stomach. A phrase was later found scratched on the kitchen wall: "He is not a man." On the 19th day, 2 doctors from Mainz arrived at the castle. They were accompanied by a priest. They tried to enter the chambers, but at the threshold, one of the doctors fainted from the stench. The second vomited. They were not allowed in. According to one version, the Duke's body burst open in the abdomen at that moment. A witness, a former clerk, who managed to glance into the room, said he saw maggots crawling out from under the burst skin, and the wine on the tray had curdled from the heat and decay. From a later treatise by the physician Heinrich Grünken, the case of the Duke of Thuringia indicates a combination of 3 fatal conditions: gangrene of the groin area, intestinal dropsy, and internal decomposition of the liver. Bed sores at the level of the shoulders and shoulder blades indicate immobility, and dark discharge from the eye sockets indicate complete decomposition of soft tissues during life. Around noon on the 20th day, they stopped giving him water, not because they didn't want to, but because there was nowhere to pour it. His throat was burned with pus. His lips were gnawed by rats, as they later wrote, at the moment of unconsciousness. The bed stood on bricks. The floor beneath it had rotted away. Liquid was leaking from under the doors. The valet, who remained with him until the end, flatly refused to tell what was happening inside. When rumors spread throughout the castle that the Duke was dead, the lieutenant of the guard ordered the doors to be broken down. None of the chroniclers recorded what they saw. Only in a private letter, written many years later by one of the guards, was the following preserved. He lay bloated, like a corpse in water. The skin on his stomach was burst open. His entrails spilled onto the floor. White worms crawled on his chest, and his eyes bulged out of their sockets. We couldn't find his lower jaw. Perhaps it had fallen off during the night. No one spoke. We just stood there until the priest ordered incense to be lit, but it didn't help. Immediately after that, the chambers were sealed. Everything that belonged to the Duke, sheets, clothes, furniture, curtains, even the clock on the wall, was taken out into the courtyard and burned. The smoke lingered for 3 days. The servants refused to go near and burned everything from the second staircase, throwing it down like cursed objects. Meanwhile, a rift was brewing in the castle. The Duke's eldest son arrived late. His letter had been intercepted. The younger son, on the contrary, arrived early. Surrounded by a strange priest and 15 mercenaries, he occupied the south tower and demanded that the chambers be opened for an official examination of the body. The court was shaken. For the first time in 20 years, the bell tolled in the west of the castle. The Duke was considered dead, but the body was not brought out. Later, chronicles claimed that the tomb was not opened for 3 days. It was not until the 23rd morning that the body was touched. 5 masked men, drenched in vinegar and wrapped in cloth, lifted the charred remains. The Duke was identified only by his ring. The priest refused to consecrate the body and was later replaced. The room where the Duke's body had decomposed was not cleaned. The servants only closed the shutters tightly, wrapped the door crack with cloths soaked in vinegar, and placed 3 buckets of live resin outside. The rooms adjacent to the bedroom were abandoned. The furniture was removed, the carpets rolled up, and the floors covered with lime. The chronicles of those days speak of a silent part of the castle from which voices, creaks, and night moans could be heard. Later, the servants claimed to have heard footsteps there, even though the doors were boarded up. The body was carried on a stretcher covered with sheet metal. Overnight, it was completely charred. The fabric stuck to the rotting remains burst from the intense heat. Those carrying the body refused to cover the remains with a shroud. They walked with the dead man's face exposed, his eyes already popped out and his nose caved in. One of the bearers fainted and died a week later of fever. The second was expelled from the castle. His last words, scribbled in the margins of a psalter, read, "I did not know that a body could stink more than sin." The Duke was carried through the inner courtyard. The courtiers, as the ceremony dictated, came out to pay their last respects. However, no one bowed. Almost everyone stood in masks, and some with rags clutched to their faces. When the stretcher passed under the arch, a raven sitting on the spire let out a sharp cry. People whispered that it was a sign. One of the senior courtiers fell to his knees and began to pray for the salvation of the duchy. The undertakers opened the family crypt, but the lid of the coffin had to be burned before the body could be lowered into it. They did not embalm the Duke. His entrails had already come out on their own. According to the records of the clerk, the stench in the crypt was so strong that neither incense nor prayers could overcome it. The priest interrupted his farewell speech 3 times, gasping for breath. Later, he demanded that the tomb be filled with lead. Meanwhile, rumors were tearing the court apart. Both of the Duke's sons, the elder, gloomy and dry, and the younger, impetuous, with a penchant for violence, claimed the throne. The council of nobles gathered in secret to discuss the regency. But none of the magnates wanted to sit in a chair that still smelled of death. The Duke's clothes, which they wanted to keep as relics, were burned in a common pit along with his bedding. All the tapestries from his chambers were taken down and burned. Black cloth was hung in their place. Lamps filled with vinegar were hung in the corridors for 2 weeks to prevent the smell from returning, but it returned. On the 25th day after his death, the archivist was found dead in the castle cellars. His face was covered with sores, and there was an ink stain on his forehead. Rumor had it that he had tried to take the Duke's diary with him, but the diary had disappeared, and no one knows who took it. One of the cooks later said that he saw the younger son hiding something under the lining of his doublet. At a council meeting convened a month later, a decision was made to ban any mention of the last days of the reign. All records were ordered to be burned. According to the town crier, the fire in which the papers burned flaked off as if ashamed of what it had seen. The ban was broken. One of the scribes rewrote the chronicle by hand and hid it in the wall of the chapel. This text was found a century later, and it is the basis of what we know today. The servants who had served the Duke in his final days dispersed. None of them remained at court. Some died of unknown diseases. One of them, Marcus, a former valet, settled in a village across the river and became a hermit. When asked about those days, he said only one thing. It was not death. It was the expulsion of the soul from the body, slow, foul, and shameful. On the 9th day, after the last movements under the sheets, the body began to make sounds. At first, they were muffled, like a grinding from within. Then, there was a hissing sound, like bubbling liquid. One of the pages on duty at the door ran away barefoot into the night, leaving the key in the keyhole. Later, he confessed to a monk that he heard someone breathing backwards, not inhaling, but exhaling, long through rotten flesh. His words were dismissed as hysteria, but the guard who replaced him later said that the smell coming from behind the door was not just putrid, it was warm and enveloping, as if steam were pulsing from inside, saturated with the dampness of decomposing life. The Duke's body was left untouched. The key was not turned. The order for an autopsy had not yet been signed, although in fact there was no longer any organ that could be opened in the usual sense. The bed on which he lay, according to the palace physician Forno, had turned into a sponge soaked in organic mush. A black liquid oozed from a hole at the bottom of the bed. Not blood, not bile, but something else, something shapeless. Worms began to gather near it, at his feet. One of them crawled onto the threshold. It was crushed with a heel, but 2 hours later, more appeared. On the 11th day, the doors were finally thrown open. Only 3 people entered, a priest, a doctor, and an executioner. The latter had not been called by mistake. He was supposed to carry out the body. None of the servants agreed to do so. A witness standing in the courtyard later wrote in his personal notebook, "They left in silence. Only the executioner's hands were shaking. The priest prayed. But his words were indistinct. The doctor turned his glove inside out and hid something that was moving in it. Only the shell remained of the body. The stomach had burst. Maggots were eating the flesh from the inside. There was no integrity under the sheets. Everything was mixed together. Clots, bone fragments, a twisted liver, ulcerated flakes of skin. One eye was still in its socket, but it was not looking up, but sideways, as if the twisted head had tried to see something in the corner before death. The remains of mucus were stuck in his throat, still bubbling. The rooms where he had died began to be cleaned, not washed, burned. The pastoral decree from the chapter stated, "Do not allow filth to enter the walls of the castle." It was decided to destroy not only the bed, but also the wooden panels, curtains, 2 chairs, a stool with a chamber pot, a carpet, and even the window frames. Everything was taken out into the courtyard and set on fire. The sheets would not come away from the body. They had to be cut off. Some were stuck together with pus so badly that the fabric tore along with pieces of skin. One of the participants in the procedure later claimed that white worms, with 2 black dots, as if they had eyes, were crawling out of the folds of the fabric that had been in contact with the belt. The official death certificate was signed 4 days after the room was burned down. It made no mention of decomposition or worms. It stated, "Acute fever caused by unidentified internal inflammation." The doctor, Forno, was asked to leave the kingdom, and a month later he died in a monastery shelter. It was said that he had the same symptoms, first swelling, then internal bleeding. None of his heirs attended the funeral. The coffin was empty. The Duke's remains could not be moved to the family crypt. They had simply disintegrated. Instead of the body, an empty lead box sealed with a church seal was placed in the crypt. The people were allowed to attend the funeral mass only from a distance, outside the city. Even the monks of the Brotherhood of Saint Catherine refused to read the liturgy over the body. If death knows no peace, the dead should not receive it. Several courtiers who had been at the castle in the last days were forced to leave their service. One, named Jacques de Lemur, wrote in a letter to his nephew, "When I close my eyes, I can still hear him wheezing, unable to breathe. I feel something wet creeping up my ankle." He later went blind. The second, a chaplain, went into seclusion in the mountains. The third hanged himself. He left a note, "I can no longer bear the smell of my own body." The death of the Duke changed the structure of government. The old nobility turned away from the dynasty. Rumors of a curse began to spread. Some claimed that a thin, faceless man was wandering around the castle. Priests performed rituals to purify the land. One of them dug a hole in the very spot where the bed had been burned and buried a silver cross there. 2 days later, the cross disappeared. Only the hole remained, filled with slime and 3 dead rats. The Duke's death brought neither relief nor triumph to the world. It was not discussed among the people, it was avoided, but it left a crack. In everything he touched, in palaces, in fabrics, in memories. And although all the sheets were burned, they appeared in the dreams of those who had seen him moan at least once,